Okay, welcome back to Telltale Books and our latest video. This time I'm going to talk about not the whole trilogy,
Just the first.
just the first one.
Yeah.
I've read the whole trilogy, but I reread Foundation just last fall before the TV series came out. And so
I'm really excited for you to get to the comparison. Sorry.
I wanted to do this. And yes, I did try to get Emily to read it. I tried to get Samantha to read it. No luck.
Yeah,
So
we
I thought,
ended up, we just were really bogged down.
I know.
A lot of illness happening in the last, it's winter. Everybody gets sick.
Been a crazy season the
When you
last
have a
few
fever,
months.
you don't want to do anything but sleep.
Exactly. Yeah, well, when I was reading this, you were in the ICU.
Oh, yeah, I was in ICU.
Last October, was it?
Yeah.
So anyway, I reread Isaac Asimov's Foundation. Oh, and by the way, this edition, this is just a mass market edition that came out in the early 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
But this was purchased by somebody down in Milwaukee, and she got him to sign it.
It's a signed copy.
Somebody named Ellen bought this book.
Good job, Ellen,
And
whoever
got
you are.
Isaac Asimov to sign it, probably at a science fiction convention or
That
something.
is awesome.
And the book was on the market. So I bought it because I never got anything. This was actually the first signed book I bought some time ago, when kind of close to when we started Telltale Books. I found it online, and I just had to have something.
What are the
with
odds,
Isaac
too?
Asimov's signature. Yeah.
I love when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
I've picked up a couple thrift store books where I'm like, there's like letters from the author or like a postcard from the author taped in the back from whoever owned it previously, or like I have which one is it? I found a signed copy of Douglas Adams.
Oh.
Mostly Harmless.
Okay.
What are the odds? What are the freaking odds? I love when that happens. Mm-hmm.
So, this is one of the earliest. The Foundation trilogy is one of the first science fiction books I came across after I first read H.G. Wells in 1977. I believe I read the Foundation trilogy in 1978 in paperback, and absolutely loved it. Fell in love with Isaac Asimov. Isaac Asimov, if you didn't live when he was alive, hearing him talk, reading his essays, he just had a great personality, and he had a great, easygoing, natural way of writing that made everything easy to understand. He was always very clear in what he was saying, and so his writing doesn't really have a style. But that's his style.
Yeah, his style is pretty casual.
It's not really. It's not what you would identify as professional writing, and a lot of people criticize him for that. That his writing isn't as good as other people.
Though.
But it's very straightforward, very to the point, very rational. Not putting, very spare, not a lot of flowery extra anything in it, and that's just his style, and that's the way he was. That made him a great science writer.
Yeah.
Because he could write about difficult science topics in a way that when you got done with it, you said, well, of course it's that way.
Yeah.
You just understood.
Of course.
You know?
Absolutely. Even if plausible deniability needs to come into play, it's easy.
No, he made it that simple. Very difficult, but he didn't dumb it down for you. He gave you all the details, but he just had a way of stating it that you reach the end and go, well, yeah, of course I understand that. It's so easy, science and math and deep physics and of course he got his start as a science fiction writer. Most of this was written in the 1940s when he was still working toward his associate professorship at Boston University in biochemistry, and these books were published first by Gnome Press, I believe, in the early 1950s, like 51, 52, 53, they came out.
Yeah.
And those editions, man, are worth so much money.
I'm sure.
On the market now. You're not going to, unless you're rich, you're not going to get a hold of one of those, which when I was a teenager in the 1970s at the public library, it was those editions sitting on the library shelf.
Yeah. Yeah.
At some time, they were sold off in a library sale for 50 cents a piece.
Yeah,
and now you find them on eBay for $5,000.
Oh, gosh. That is the nature of...
Mind-blowing.
Yes, the nature of literature these days.
So anyway, that's kind of a little bit about Isaac Asimov and a little bit about... There are some good Folio Society editions. Easton Press has a really nice edition illustrated by Bob Eggleston. Mm-hmm. Even the less expensive Barnes & Noble leather-bound edition...
that is a pretty nice one. With the
Michael Whelan illustrations is a beautiful book. Mm-hmm. So you can get a good, not mass market copy of Foundation Trilogy today, mm-hmm. And not necessarily pay huge amounts of money. So Foundation. The story was written as 4, I believe, shorter works, novelette length works, published in Astounding, a science fiction magazine, edited by John Campbell, mm-hmm. and were among Asimov's earliest works, mm-hmm. and they were highly popular with the readers. Mm-hmm. And so being 4 different short stories, they weren't really written to be a novel. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think what happened back then is the only way science fiction writers got published, like Asimov, the only way they got published is in the science fiction magazines. You either wrote a novel and it was serialized, or you wrote short stories and sold them. The short stories were faster to write, you can pump a lot more out, and since you're only getting paid 2 cents a word at most, you had to do a lot of writing in order to make a living at it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people weren't making a living at it, like Asimov was a professor of biochemistry. Mm-hmm. That was his main job. So they wrote a lot of short stories for the magazines. Yeah. And then when UFOs hit the news and everybody wanted space stories, all of a sudden all these science fiction writers had these stories that were kind of related universes, mm-hmm. like Foundation, like the City series by Clifford Simak, mm-hmm. The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. These were all short stories that were never supposed to be a novel. Yeah, but suddenly it was a demand. Publishers suddenly wanted these novels, and the mm-hmm. quickest way to get a novel into their hands and get this money, because they were paying a lot better, is to take those short stories, put them together in a novel, maybe do a little tweaking to mm-hmm. connect them a little better, and say, here's a book. Mm-hmm. And they published it. And that's kind of what happened with Foundation. So it's 4 stories of a related bigger story, but the individual stories are not really directly connected to one another. Mm-hmm. They're not chapters.
They're just happening simultaneously or within sequence.
Well, not simultaneously. There's a jump of years between them. Okay. And one alternate title for early editions of Foundation were the 1,000-Year Plan. Mm. So he's talking about huge spans of time mm-hmm. in this book. And that makes it difficult to make it a character story, mm-hmm. because you have it, just like 2001, you've got all this history coming into play. Mm-hmm. Heinlein was able to get around that problem with Time Enough for Love by making his character immortal, mm-hmm. or almost immortal. Lazarus Long.
So it's like reading the Silmarillion almost, where you get all these little stories that are integral to mm-hmm. the history of this complete work, mm-hmm. but none of them is really. It's all just happening in sequence or in spans of time. Yeah. Except the elves are immortal.
So you got this huge cast of characters moving through what is really just a 200-page book.
Oh, interesting.
Spanning,
several thousand years.
Foundation itself, I think, only spans a couple hundred years. But, the people in the first story are dead when the second story is taking place. Yeah. So you don't have time to really build much character, which is something a lot of people have a problem with here. What you have to remember is that it is so, when the point of what you're writing is an idea that spans millennia. Mm-hmm. unless you make your characters immortal, most of them are going to die early in the book.
Yeah, yeah. They're not going to be reintroduced later.
Time and build characters. You got to move through characters very quickly. And so you have to make that decision. Is the book about your idea, or is the book about
these characters?
One person. Asimov, for his idea, I think wisely chose to make it about the idea and not about the characters. It's a
conceptual thing. It's not a character-driven thing.
So characters in these books are like what Alfred Hitchcock said. They're cattle. You tell them where to go and they go there. And they have no more importance than that. And so Foundation, of course, what is it about? It's about far in the future, there is a galactic empire. It spans the entire galaxy. And a mathematician, a brilliant mathematician, sits down and thinks about history and tries to come up with mathematical formulas that will define history, define occurrences through history, and find a mathematical way to predict the future. So it's trying to step on the fortune teller's toes by using math and science. But also, more importantly, trying to see, is there a way we can avoid definite problems that will arise in the future if we do nothing? Is there a way we can predict the future accurately enough to know what could happen if we go down this road, and then know if we made these changes, will we get ourselves on a course that's more palatable with us? And that's what the main character Harry Seldon does, is he invents psychohistory. It's kind of like weather forecasting in that it's more...
It's like the Minority Report, but science.
Yeah, well, weather forecasting relies on statistics to say, okay, a month from now we know it's going to be spring. And temperatures are going to be warmer, because statistically it always is. Psychohistory does the same thing with human psychology and trends in history.
That's so interesting.
Create statistical models that will then show the overall, not specific. It's not going to say this person's going to be born 100 years from now and die at age 86, but it can say, yes, the galactic empire is going to fall, is going to fail, because there are these certain forces in play today that are going to have these effects and cause these results, and these results then will result in this down the road. And if all of that really does happen overall, then this is where history is going to go.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
I think that's really cool, because I don't think, humans don't like to think this way, but for how different individuals are, we are all still very much the same. And I think people have a hard time with that concept, but this makes perfect sense in the context of this story. Whereas just because we're all individuals doesn't mean there aren't ways that we are all extremely the same. I just think that's so interesting. I like that concept.
It is. It's a brilliant idea, and Isaac Asimov was good at that. His robot stories are based on his 3 laws of robotics, which I don't remember exactly what they were. Basically, that
do no harm, take no shit. I don't know.
Do no harm to mankind, and do no harm to yourselves unless it's going
logical conditioning, that kind of thing.
So he wrote those 3 laws of robotics, worked out those 3 laws, and figured these 3 laws are going to cover everything where robots could break down and become dangerous. If these 3 laws are built in, and if they always work, then because before his robot stories, robots were always just these machines that were on the rampage destroying things. And so he thought, well, how can we build a robot then that won't be that way? That won't be an evil, mindless, destructive machine. So he came up with the 3 laws and worked out the logic that if those 3 laws are in place and operating properly in the robot, that the robots will be okay. And then he sat down to work out the logic of how many ways
that could go wrong.
It could go wrong.
Oh,
and that's what he wrote all those robot stories about. Is in each case there's something going on that has to do with the 3 laws of robotics, and people are scratching their heads. Why are these robots, like Runaround? I think that was Robbie was the first one. One of the earliest ones was a short story called Runaround. It's in iRobot. They're on Mercury. And there are pools of some kind of metal, molten metal, that they are mining. And of course, humans can't go out in this. The robots have to do it. And they see this robot just going in a circle around this one puddle. Wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
And so they have to figure out why. And why the robot was doing that had to do with the logic system of the 3 laws of robotics. That it got stuck.
Oh gosh,
because
that's so
it had to take one action, but it couldn't take that action because it would result in a bad action, and so the logic caused it to just start going in a circle.
It made
it
insane.
Stop.
Literally insane.
Yeah, but in a harmless way. I mean, it would just keep going that way till its batteries ran down.
Yeah.
Others weren't so harmless, but that's what his stories were all about, is looking at the logic, and you can see right there the story is about the idea and the science and the logic. It's not about people. So someone looking for strong characters, what are you looking in a story like that for?
Yeah,
it's not about
I am a sucker for
people.
Strong characters, so I don't know that I would actually enjoy it. Well, I mean, I might enjoy it because I also like deep concepts. So
Isaac Asimov was writing scientific mystery. He'd pose a problem, and the characters had to try and figure it out.
Yep.
And they used the application of science and reason to do it.
Yes.
That's what all of his everything I've read by him. That's what it's about. It's like these little mystery stories, but based on science.
Yes. I really want you to get in your compare and contrast between the TV show, too.
Okay.
Before you get too far.
TV show was okay, but I wouldn't have named it Foundation, because while the characters and situations and the big idea of psychohistory were all there, it bore little resemblance to the book Foundation. You did have Harry Seldon starting psychohistory. You did have Harry Seldon send a bunch of people to a world where they would basically kind of hide out while the empire collapsed, but they'd be in an important place to be able to buffer some of the things that went on to try and reduce the time after the empire falls when things are built back up, and change 100,000-year dark times into only 1,000. That was his goal with the whole thing, and that was maintained in the TV series. But they took the guy who was the leader of the planet where the Foundation went to. I'm forgetting names of planets, but they took him and they made him a young black girl.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the main points of that character was that he was a pacifist. And the reason Harry Seldon, long before, planned for him to become the mayor or the leader of this foundation at this point in history is to avert wars.
Yeah.
Find peaceful solutions to avoid things to devolving into total chaotic galactic war.
Yes.
And it was successful, but only because this particular character was a pacifist and was dead set on finding clever ways to resolve the conflict without a single fire shot. Okay, so in the TV, this young black girl who is supposed to be him, she's all fired up to start fighting.
Which I also find to be kind of racist, personally. When you brought that up to me, I thought of, there's a lot of mentality, especially in, Anglo-Saxon culture and white culture, that Black people have attitudes and they're fiery. And while that is spirited and should be embraced, in a lot of instances, I see it as this is a cultural definition that we are blanket statementing by making this character this way.
Right.
And that really frustrated me because I'm like, okay, granted, I might be being a snowflake about this, but I don't like this mentality that they chose... There was no better way in my brain, from what I've been reading in literature and a lot of stuff like about being anti-racist and a lot of that deconstruction that I'm trying to go through. There was no way in my brain for me to reconcile that and be like, why are you going to take this fiery personality and put it in this girl who happens to be of this ethnicity that is not in context to how this story goes at all, is entirely the opposite. It just felt too intentional. And part of it was a race thing for me. The other part of it was young and childish, and the other part of it was
then
female and hormonal.
In charge?
Yeah, like the way I broke it down is black, fiery, childish, young, female, hormonal.
Yeah.
That was the only way as a female that I understood that character when you brought that up. And I was like...
And that's, through
I get
that whole series, I'm seeing they're just struggling to take this character that they built seriously as the leader of the Foundation. That's ridiculous.
But I also see, too, that they wanted to do that to kind of bring in a different dynamic. Because we also run into the issue in a lot of science fiction that minorities are left out, females are left out, and children are left out. But I felt like it was all, like... It just wasn't reconciling well in my brain when you were talking to me about it. And I was just like... Especially when it's so blatantly different from what was actually written.
Yeah.
So it just felt like it was too intentional and trying too hard to be too sharp.
And granted, adapting Foundation, Isaac Asimov didn't put much diversity in this story. Not many women, not anybody of other races.
And that's culturally just the way it was.
And that's the 1940s.
Yeah, that's just the way it was.
But Asimov was different, because if you really want to adapt something that's got some diversity and is more palatable today, then let's make iRobot more faithful, because the character, the robot psychologist that goes around and ultimately solves all the problem, is Susan Calvin.
Yeah.
Okay, in the early 1940s, he had a woman be the top
be the hero, essentially. The
that went around
focus of
and
the
solved
protagonist.
all these problems for the corporation U.S. U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men.
Yeah. So my response, of course, in context as well, being female, understanding civil rights, and working through my deconstruction, did not have a good reaction when you told me about that.
Yeah.
And then it's even worse because... Why not make them a pacifist? Because in media it's boring.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear the producers going, we need something with all kinds of space battles like Star Wars and
we
Star
need fire
Trek
and explosions.
Yeah, and so let's take Isaac Asimov's Foundation
and turn it on its
morons.
Head. Yeah.
let's take a book that the whole point of it is pacifism by someone who is a lifelong pacifist, and let's try
have
to
a space
turn it
war.
into space wars and battles and laser fights and crap like that.
Yeah.
No.
And that's my question is it even Foundations at this point? As they continue this series, how are they prolonging the fall, and how are they reconciling 1,000-year, reducing it to 1,000-year rebuild if there's going to be so much more destruction? Like, how are they going to reconcile that? Which, again, goes back to why did they even call this the Foundation in the first place?
Right.
Because it's nothing like building the foundation. It is literally destroying the fucking house.
Yeah. Well, the Foundation series, the first one, Foundation, doesn't have a lot of action. Later on, you have a character called the Mule that starts sowing chaos through things, and that's where things get really interesting, because he is an unforeseen element.
He's the outlier.
The statistics couldn't account for him, and so now how do you manage to keep on Harry Seldon's plan when there's this guy out there that rises the power through his charisma and abilities, and
he's the outlier.
Starts destroying everything.
Interesting.
It's
See, that still could have been good, though, without needing to do this whole scenario with the anti-pacifist version of that main character. Main character.
And the later books in the Foundation trilogy introduce the mule. That's his name. But nobody knows who he is, and nobody can identify him. He's this totally mysterious character hiding in plain sight.
Ooh, interesting.
And it's the most compelling anti-hero or villain or whatever you want to call him that I've ever encountered. Really, he's this mysterious
like a
character
phantom
that comes out and throws chaos into all the plans, and everybody's scrambling to try and deal with it.
So good. Yep, that's awesome. That sounds really.
So you got to go on and read the entire trilogy.
Yes.
Which is why it's packaged so conveniently into one book.
A nice omnibus right there for you.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yes, I'm very interested to read it. I'm super excited about it. Ever since you told me about it originally. Okay. And ever since I saw that the TV show came out, of course, my automatic reaction is, oh, there's a book. I should read that before I watch this, so I can, do that kind of stuff. But we, of course, naturally, when we start reading things or discussing books and things that we like, we start talking. He tells me a lot about these things before I've had a chance to read them, but I'm even more intrigued now. I feel like that's kind of part of the process for me, because now we have this day and age where literature is so ambiguous as to what it's about. It's harder to find out what a story is about because it's not on the back cover anymore.
Yeah.
Another tangent.
But I view the Foundation TV series kind of like I've just recently read The Lawnmower Man, a short story by Stephen King, which is famously made into a movie. I had seen the movie a long time ago and thought it was a cool science fiction movie, and then I just recently read the story and I'm thinking, oh man, there's nothing from the story other than the title.
Yeah, I kind of felt like that too. We discussed that when I was in college. I took a humanities course called The History of Middle Earth, which was literally just going through the history of Middle Earth, not even just Tolkien and his writing it. It is literally the fictitious world of Lord of the Rings, which was a really fun class. And while we were going through it, a lot of what we talked about, especially in comparison to the films, because the films were still fairly new, but there's so much about certain characters in the book that would have been boring and would not have translated well into film.
Yeah.
So, like, the inner conflict that Aragorn has about being king, not even in the books. Because Aragorn knew what his place was as king in this time frame. It had been predicted, the future had been foretold, sort of thing. Whereas in the movie, that inner conflict was necessary in order to make the story interesting. Because otherwise he would have come off as an arrogant asshole.
Yeah.
But that was it. That was leadership. That's how all Anglo-Saxon myth is done. And I feel like that's kind of what they try to do with this series, too, is they're trying to make it more interesting than what it would seem from a pacifist perspective. Even though it is a compelling idea in literary form, it does not translate well to visual media.
No, I think it could be done. I mean, Lord of the Rings movies were fantastic, and that was something that people say, oh, you can never make a movie of it. John Carter of Mars, a lot of people hated it, but as far as adapting the book to a movie, I think they did a really good job. And that was another one that everybody said, oh, you can never make a movie of that. You could never make a movie of it exactly as Burroughs wrote it, because it would get an X rating, but you can make a movie and make it really good. Go out and pick up Foundation and give it a chance. It really is a great work, but it's not. You have to throw all your expectations, all of what you think literature is, in the trash can before you read it. It's not about character. It's not about writing style. It's not going to get you into anybody's head. It's about science. It's about logic. It's about reason and rationality. It's about pacifism. And it's about ideas. And it's not about people. It's not about you. It's not about emotions. If you're looking for character, look somewhere else. If his fiction is so problematical for everybody because it isn't what we are taught fiction is supposed to be. This isn't like The Scarlet Letter.
Yeah,
this
it's not
isn't
drama.
like Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
This isn't like Hemingway. He doesn't write in a flowery style like Poe or Lovecraft or Tolkien. He is a professor and a scientist, and he approaches his stories as scientific mysteries. And it's the
and through
ideas
the lens of
and
his specific ideals.
it's the ideas and the science that and the logic that are what his fiction is about. It's a totally different type of literature than anyone else has done, even other science fiction writers.
Yeah.
And because his writing style is so simple and straightforward and lacking any kind of artistic pretense, people don't feel he's a good writer because he focuses on science and ideas instead of focusing on character and their problems. He's considered to be not a good writer. What you have to understand is that he's writing something different than everybody else has written.
Yeah.
He's writing real science fiction.
What I love too is, like, I'm thinking of a quote, and again, I can't remember who said it, but it's, small minds talk about people, mid minds talk about events, but big minds talk about ideas.
Exactly.
And concepts. And that's pivotal to what you have to understand about Isaac Asimov, is his mind was so big, he's looking at things from a holistic perspective that the human mind doesn't automatically do on its own. And then he's writing literature about it. So,
2001's the same way. How do you write a story that starts at the dawn of man and goes all the way to the final step of evolution and write it about character? You don't. You're writing about
events and concepts.
About how changes are happening over millions of years. You can't focus on any one character in that. So the characters are all bland in 2001. You can't do it any other way.
Yeah, that's all right, because it isn't about them. It's about the events that come about to bring
history.
on this concept. Yep, to bring on the concept.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so I think that's all I got for this one.
Thanks for joining us, guys. Really good discussion. Let us know what you thought about the TV show, about the book, about the series, Isaac Asimov as a whole. Let us know. We love hearing from you. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.